On an ordinary weekday afternoon, I watched a short clip online that I almost skipped. I was tired, half distracted, scrolling without really seeing anything. The title mentioned Keanu Reeves, a stranger, and an act of kindness. I remember thinking, I already know how these stories go. Someone famous does something nice, everyone shares it, and then we move on. But for some reason, I let it play. The video itself wasn't spectacular. There was no dramatic music, no slow motion, no big speeches. It was just a simple story about him stopping to help someone he didn't know, quietly, with no cameras planned, no red carpet, no interview waiting afterward. He listened, he waited, he gave his time. And when it ended, I found myself staring at the blank screen, not thinking about him, but about myself. Why did such a small moment feel so heavy inside me? Why did watching a stranger show kindness leave me with questions about my own life? It wasn't the celebrity that stayed with me. It was the stillness. The unhurried way he had simply paused his own life for someone he didn't owe anything to. No rush to escape. No nervous glances at the time. Just presence. And I remember feeling this quiet discomfort, like I had just been shown a mirror I hadn't asked for. There's a certain kind of loneliness that doesn't look lonely from the outside. You can have a full schedule, people around you, constant messages on your phone, and still feel like no one really sees you. Most of us, at some point, walk through the world as if we are ghosts passing through other ghosts. We nod, we say, "How are you?" We exchange polite words, but we are mostly living inside our heads, locked in our own concerns. For a long time, that was how I moved through my days. I wasn't unkind. I didn't hurt people on purpose. I just didn't stop. I was busy. I had things to do, deadlines to meet, messages to reply to. I would pass people on the street and barely register their existence. Someone would look troubled on a train, and I would lower my eyes to my phone. It felt normal. It felt efficient. It felt like life. I told myself, everyone has their own burden. You can't save everyone. And that's true. We can't. But the story of that stranger and Keanu Reeves didn't talk about saving anyone. It talked about something smaller, something quieter, staying long enough to listen. Staying long enough to let another human being feel less alone, even for a few minutes. And that, somehow, made me uneasy. Because if kindness wasn't about grand gestures, if it was simply about presence, then it meant I had walked past countless chances to be kind, and chosen not to, without even noticing. The story, as it was told, was simple. He saw someone struggling. Not dramatically, not collapsing on the ground, not shouting for help. Just someone whose pain was visible if you actually looked. Maybe it was in their posture, or the way they were standing a bit apart from everyone else. Maybe in their eyes. It's never the same detail, but we all know that quiet heaviness when we see it, if we are paying attention. He could have kept going. He could have offered a quick smile and moved on. Instead, he stopped. He asked a question. He waited for the answer. He let the silence unfold without rushing to escape it. And then, as the story went, he shared a coffee, some time, and a few words that weren't meant to fix everything. Just to say, "I'm here, right now, with you." The person later told someone about it, and the story eventually circled the internet as these things do. It was retold so many times that the details probably changed along the way. That's not what mattered to me. What stayed was the image of two people, one known to the world, one invisible to most, sitting together like equals, simply sharing a human moment. I wondered why that touched me more deeply than it probably should have. Sometimes, we discover who we are not in what we do, but in what we walk past. I thought of the times I'd seen someone struggling and chosen distance over involvement. The coworker whose eyes were red and whose emails were oddly formal. I had noticed, thought something's wrong, and then typed, "Hope you're doing okay," before going back to my own concerns. The old man in the grocery store looking lost in front of the shelves. I had walked past him, assuming he would figure it out. The friend who answered, "I'm fine," a little too quickly, and I let it go, because digging deeper would have taken more time, more emotional effort than I felt ready to give at that moment. None of these moments were dramatic. They weren't stories you would tell in a movie or publish in an article. They were just small, almost invisible crossroads. Points where I could have stopped, and didn't. The more I thought about that simple story of a stranger helped by a famous actor, the clearer something became. It wasn't about the scale of the kindness. It was about availability. Was I available to the world around me, or was I always just passing through? When we think about people like Keanu Reeves, we often talk about movies, fame, interviews, jokes, memes. We rarely pause to think about what it actually means for a human being to carry that much attention on their shoulders and still have space left over for someone else. We assume that people above us in status are too far removed to understand ordinary life. But in that story, there was nothing above, nothing below, just two human beings, one simply not turning away. Kindness, in that sense, is strangely equalizing. When you truly see another person and offer them your time, your patience, your listening, all the layers of who's important and who's not begin to fall away. It's not the celebrity helped an ordinary person. It's one person stayed for another. And that made me think, in my own life, where do I stand? Am I too busy, too preoccupied, or too guarded to offer this basic human presence? There is a quiet cost to constantly moving past other people's pain. We become efficient, yes, but a little empty. We build routines and boundaries, which are necessary, but sometimes they grow so thick that nothing real can pass through. We begin to believe that kindness is just being polite, holding doors, saying thank you, liking a post, sending a heart emoji. Those things are not bad. They are just safe. Real kindness asks a little more of us. It asks us to pause whatever story is playing in our own minds and step into someone else's for a moment. It asks us to accept that we might feel awkward, that we might not know what to say, that our help might be rejected, that we might be reminded of our own unhealed places. Maybe that's why it's easier to share stories about others being kind than to practice it ourselves. It's safer to admire than to imitate. Safer to say, "What a good person," than to ask, "What kind of person am I being?" The story of that small act with a stranger didn't give me all the details, but it gave me enough to see my own excuses. There was a day, some weeks after watching that video, when I found myself standing at a bus stop in the rain. People were scattered under the narrow shelter, each locked into their private world. Headphones in, phones out, eyes lowered. I noticed a woman standing just outside the shelter, getting wet. She wasn't that far from us. Her jumper was darkened by the rain. Her hair stuck to her cheeks. For a moment, I told myself she must prefer standing alone. Maybe she was about to walk away. Maybe she didn't want to be near others. But then I looked at her face. She seemed lost in thought, not quite present, like she was somewhere else entirely, inside herself. And without meaning to, I heard a quiet question in the back of my mind. Are you going to walk past this, too? There was nothing heroic about what I did next. I didn't rescue her from danger or transform her life. I simply stepped aside, made a bit more space under the shelter, and said, "There's room here if you want." She blinked, as if waking up, and then stepped in with a small thank you. Our shoulders almost touched. For a moment, we stood in silence, listening to the rain tapping the metal roof overhead. I could have left it there, but now that I had started, something inside me wanted to stay open. Long day? I asked, in the kind of gentle tone that leaves room for the other person to answer as much or as little as they like. She let out a soft laugh, the kind that sounds close to tears. You have no idea. We didn't share our life stories. We didn't exchange names. She didn't open up about everything she was going through. Instead, we talked about small things, the unpredictability of the weather, delayed buses, the absurd way time feels fast and slow at once. But there was a softness in her voice by the time the bus arrived. Before she got on, she said, "Thanks for, just talking." It was such a simple thing. It didn't feel like a grand act of kindness. But when I sat down on the bus, I realized I felt different. Not proud, not like a hero, just a little more human. As if a door inside me that had been closed for a long time had quietly opened a crack. Acts of kindness rarely look like they do in stories. They're often smaller, quieter, and less clear. They don't come with music or neat conclusions. Sometimes you never know if what you did really mattered. You might never see the person again. You might never find out if that moment changed anything in their life. But it almost always changes something in yours. Watching that story about Keanu Reeves and a stranger didn't turn me into a saint. I still miss chances. I still keep walking sometimes when I could stop. I still shy away from conversations that feel too heavy when I'm tired. There are days when I simply don't have the emotional energy to be fully present for others, and I'm learning that this is human too. The point, I've come to realize, isn't to be endlessly available, to exhaust yourself in service of everybody else's needs. The point is simply to live with your eyes open, to notice when the world gives you a chance to be gentle, and to say yes a little more often than you say no. Kindness, in its truest form, isn't about perfection. It's about willingness. A willingness to be interrupted. A willingness to sit for a moment in someone else's storm, even if you can't stop the rain. What moved me about that original story wasn't that a famous person did something good. It was that in a life that must be filled with demands, expectations, requests, and distractions, he still made room for an unscripted moment of humanity. He didn't have to. Nobody does. And that's what makes kindness what it is. It cannot be required, only offered. There's a quiet strength in people who are gentle, a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage at first. It's easier, in some ways, to harden yourself, to say life is harsh, people are selfish, I'll look after myself. That armor can feel safe, but it's also heavy. It doesn't just keep others out, it keeps you locked in. When you stop for a stranger, or even for someone you already know but haven't really seen in a while, you're not just helping them. You're loosening your own armor. You're reminding yourself that you are still capable of being touched by other lives, other stories, other sorrows and joys. You're proving to yourself that the world hasn't made you numb. That realization is a quiet kind of relief. Over time, I've noticed that the most meaningful changes in my life didn't arrive with fireworks. They arrive softly, like the way dawn enters a room, barely noticeable at first, until suddenly you realize you can see more clearly. Allowing myself to be inspired by that story didn't mean copying someone else's life or trying to manufacture big gestures. It meant asking, gently and honestly, how can I move through the world with a little more attention? How often do I let my fear of awkwardness decide for me? What would happen if I gave people the benefit of my presence, even in small, fleeting ways? It's strange how such simple questions can shift the way you walk down a street, wait in a line, sit on a bus, or open your phone. You start to notice people more, not as background figures, but as entire worlds that happen to be crossing your path for a moment. You don't have to fix them. You don't have to change their lives. Sometimes, the lesson is that you are not there to rescue anyone. You are simply there to be there. And there's another side to all of this. Sometimes you are the stranger. Sometimes you are the one standing in the rain, not quite aware of how soaked you are. Sometimes you are the person whose smile is forced, whose "I'm fine" is thin and fragile. Sometimes you are the one silently hoping that someone, anyone, will notice that something isn't quite right. When we think about kindness, we often imagine ourselves as the giver. But there is a quiet, humbling wisdom in learning how to receive it as well. To accept a seat offered on a crowded train without protesting. No, it's okay. To let someone hold the door. To allow a friend to listen when you'd rather say, "It's nothing." To say, when asked how you are, "Honestly, it's been hard lately." When we let others be kind to us, we are not just taking, we are allowing them to be who they are at their best. We are participating in that same human circle of giving and receiving. We are saying, we are both human here. We both need each other, in different ways, at different times. Maybe the stranger in that story, the one he stopped for, walked away not only feeling seen but also feeling allowed to be human, allowed to be vulnerable, to be imperfect, to not be okay for a while. And maybe he, walking away from that moment, felt the same thing. In the end, the story that inspired all these thoughts isn't really about a celebrity at all. It's about a choice. A choice to stop instead of pass by. A choice to listen instead of assume. A choice to share a moment instead of protecting every second of your schedule. We don't need cameras or headlines to make these choices. In fact, they work best when no one is watching. The real audience is much quieter. It's the part of ourselves that is always observing who we are becoming. Life will keep rushing, with or without our consent. Our days will fill themselves with tasks, responsibilities, worries, and habits. But somewhere inside all that movement, there will always be small openings, brief, gentle chances to be kind. Most of them will look ordinary. Someone carrying too many bags. Someone sitting alone. Someone unusually quiet in a conversation. Someone who says, "I'm tired," in a way that means more than just lack of sleep. We can walk past these moments, as I have done many times. Or we can pause, even briefly. Ask a question. Offer a word. Share a silence. When he stopped for that stranger, what the world saw was kindness. What I saw, once I looked closely, was possibility. The possibility that any of us, no matter who we are, can choose to live a little more open than the world expects us to. And perhaps that is the simple, quiet lesson. We are all moving through our own storms, often invisible to others. We cannot fix every cloud or stop every rain. But we can, sometimes, share an umbrella. Sometimes we can stand still beside someone, even for a moment, and let them know that in this vast, fast world, they're not entirely alone. Kindness doesn't always change the world in visible ways. More often, it changes the shape of a single day for one person. And, gently, the shape of the person who chose to be kind.